Like crying wolf, much of the world turns a deaf ear when North Korea threatens destruction on its enemies. But now, in his 13th year of running the country, Kim Jong-un may actually be serious about armed conflict. As his nation's nuclear capabilities and missile program have matured, Kim is testing the boundaries of his newfound strategic power. In January 2024, he closed down agencies working on reunification and removed like-minded statements from North Korea's constitution. Kim then went on a rant, declaring he had the right to annihilate South Korea. Under normal circumstances, such rhetoric would be dismissed. However, we live in an age of war. Think of Ukraine, Israel, Iran, Ethiopia, etc. An armed conflict in Korea is just the kind of war we could stumble into were recent provocations to escalate. While it's true that North Korea has no chance of winning a war against the South, the fallout would see millions of artillery shells and thousands of rockets rain upon South Korea's capital Seoul, which sits a stone's throw away from the demilitarized zone. That same region also happens to be home to the bulk of the massive South Korean economy. The ramifications of such a conflict would be global. Imagine a deadly conflict smack in the middle of the second, third, and 13th largest economies. Supply chains would collapse, inflation would surge, and the global economy would be knocked off the rails. Clearly, Kim's rhetoric cannot be dismissed easily. So let's go over some scenarios if Kim decides to make good on his threats. Today's video is sponsored by Conflict of Nations, a free online strategy game where you choose a real country to lead into a modern global conflict. Up to 128 other players are moving their units across the map in real time. So to win, you need to form alliances and construct all types of units, including tanks, jets, and submarines. Conflict of Nations is a huge game. It can take weeks for a game round to complete, which makes logistics as necessary as tactics. The key to victory is to think ahead and build alliances. What I like most about the game is that you can play with the same account on both PC and mobile. That convenience sets it apart from other games. Using our link below, you will get an exclusive gift: 13,000 gold and 1 month of premium subscription for free. The offer is only available for 30 days, so get started sooner rather than later. How would a war with North Korea happen? Well, it's safe to assume it wouldn't be anything like in 1950. Back then, invading North Korean troops caught the US off guard and swiftly took over much of the peninsula before the American and South Korean counteroffensive. Pyongyang nearly achieved total victory. However, the Allied forces quickly rallied their numbers and reversed the situation, pushing the North Koreans back and beyond their home bases, almost reaching the Chinese border. Not surprisingly, Beijing got involved, which eventually led to a stalemate that resulted in a ceasefire treaty. The Korean peninsula has remained split at around the 38th parallel ever since. Kim Jong-un is unlikely to repeat history, not from a lack of will, but from a lack of means. South Korea has a clear technological superiority. They would shoot down North Korean jets even before they entered its airspace. So, a war between the two Koreas is more likely to come about unintentionally. A routine provocation, for example, could be misread, and back-and-forth retaliation could spiral into a full-out war. The most likely place for such an incident is near the border islands in the Yellow Sea. These islands are part of South Korea, but are located in waters claimed by the North. Back in 2010, North Korean forces torpedoed a South Korean warship near Bangneong Island, killing 46 sailors. A few months later, that same island was the scene of a deadly artillery bombardment that killed soldiers and civilians alike. Suffice it to say that tensions are hot in the Yellow Sea. Even today, as recently as January 2024, North Korea conducted military exercises near the border islands. South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol responded by saying, "If North Korea makes a provocation, we will punish it multiple times over." Any skirmish that escalates, even a peripheral attack in the Yellow Sea, would quickly turn the crosshairs on Seoul. As the political and industrial capital of South Korea, Seoul's greater metropolitan area is home to 26 million people. Seoul is also home to about 70% of South Korea's $1.6 trillion economy. It is the base for some of the world's top industrial giants, including Samsung, Hyundai, Kia Motors, LG Electronics, and many more. An armed conflict that touches Seoul, even a brief one, would see the collapse of global supply chains, which would then plunge the global economy into a recession. Unfortunately for Seoul, it sits only 40 kilometers away from the demilitarized zone. Across that line, North Korea has placed about 12,000 artillery pieces stocked with millions of rounds of shells, not to mention thousands of missiles and rockets. Should the conflict go kinetic, North Korea would likely target high-value military, political, and economic targets in Seoul. According to a 2020 analysis by RAND, just 1 minute of artillery and rocket barrage would see 15,000 casualties in Seoul. If the barrage lasts more than an hour, the numbers would climb to 100,000. According to the South Koreans, the North can fire about 500,000 artillery rounds within the first hour and continue that pace for several hours. So, we're talking hundreds of thousands of casualties on day one, just from conventional firepower. The mere thought of this capacity gives Pyongyang incredible political leverage. North Korea keeps its howitzers, mortars, and rockets in hardened positions and ready to fire on short notice for precisely this purpose. At the same time, according to South Korea's defense ministry, some 200,000 North Korean troops would try to cross the border by land, sea, air, and even tunnel. Their objective would be to target and destroy the infrastructure on the Han River that flows through the center of Seoul. Doing so would split the city in two and trap millions of civilians from fleeing the scene. By trapping the civilian population, North Korea could then fire chemical weapons into the city. Pyongyang has an arsenal of up to 5,000 tons of chemical weapons, including chlorine gas, cyanide, and sarin. Under the right circumstances, 1,000 kilograms of sarin could terminate as many as 125,000 people. So, if such nerve agents were fired on Seoul, thousands would die with every passing minute. It's the stuff of nightmares. Nevertheless, that is where the North Korean advantage stops. South Korea is more than ready for a fight. The country has Patriot defense systems that can intercept incoming missiles. It has nearly 600,000 active duty personnel and more than 3.1 million in reserve. The South Korean military budget is larger than North Korea's entire economy. Plus, there are some 28,000 American troops based in the country, and the South Korean military would enjoy access to American spy satellites without interruption. Should that still fall short, US bombers in Guam and warships in Japan could come to South Korea's aid. Admittedly, North Korea has a manpower advantage. The 200,000 North Korean troops that would cross into the south are part of the 1.1 million strong standing army. However, numbers aren't everything. South Korean ground forces are better equipped and better trained. Their Javelin missile systems would make short work of the Soviet-era armored vehicles employed by the North, of which there are about 6,500. And if that wasn't enough, South Korea has F-35 jets equipped with high-end surface-to-air missiles that can deal with anything the North throws at it. From the very first minutes of contact, South Korea, with the aid of the Americans, would establish total air superiority in every way imaginable. South Korean forces would target hostile command centers, ammunition sites, radars, bunkers, missile silos, and nuclear facilities in hopes of wiping out as many hostile assets as possible. The same supremacy would extend into the naval domain. North Korean submarines are obsolete and can't stray far from the coast because that would make them detectable. In a matter of days, North Korea's military infrastructure, logistics, and transportation network would be destroyed and left defenseless, but fighting on the ground would linger on for a few more weeks, if not months. Eventually, though, South Korea would gain the upper hand and move to take the cities in the north. Seoul would win, but at a tremendous cost. A cost so high that some might even consider it unbearable. Another possible scenario would be limited warfare with North Korea, a scene that was discussed during the Trump administration. Limited warfare in the form of preemptive strikes would only take place if Washington and Seoul believed a large-scale North Korean attack was imminent. The objective of limited warfare would be to demonstrate the military superiority of the Allied forces and remind Kim that he would meet a most unnatural end. Its purpose would be to deliver a message of deterrence. The problem with limited warfare is that it would very likely lead to full-out warfare. What's more, in recent years, the bulk of North Korea's liquid fuel rockets have been replaced by solid fuel systems, which would take even less time to fire. So the preemptive option would see North Korean missile and rocket retaliation with little to no warning. Still worse, if Kim misreads the American preemptive strike, he might very well react by deploying nuclear weapons. In January 2023, a declassified paper by the US National Intelligence Council stated that Kim would only use nuclear weapons if he believed he and his regime were in peril. Misreading a message of deterrence could fall into that category. The precise number of North Korean nuclear weapons is unknown. It is speculated to be somewhere between 40 and 90 warheads, with Kim's ultimate goal being to develop between 100 and 300 warheads in the coming years. One nuclear strike on Seoul would cause up to 1.5 million casualties. That's from just one warhead. North Korea could also strike against the US bases nearby, including Busan, Okinawa, and even Guam. American casualties would mount in the thousands. Hitting targets on the US mainland is something that is also openly discussed, but it is questionable whether the North Koreans have the ICBM technology at this point in time. Another variable to consider is China. Beijing has historically acted as Pyongyang's closest ally, fighting even aside the North Koreans during the First War. China has every reason to prevent an armed conflict in its neighborhood. A conventional or nuclear conflict would result in North Korea's eventual defeat and move American troops even closer to the Chinese border. So, armed conflict goes against China's interests. Even so, Beijing's influence over Pyongyang is limited. In spite of close economic ties, the Chinese have proven incapable of coercing the behavior of their North Korean allies. For instance, during the Trump administration, China cooperated with the United States on the UN Security Council to condemn North Korea's nuclear weapons program. Yet, the diplomatic endeavor failed to change Kim's policy. All it did was push North Korea closer into Russia's embrace. Since then, North Korean weapons sales to Russia have brought the two even closer to an understanding. On the other hand, however, North Korean weapons sales to Russia may be the only silver lining in the entire strategic landscape. Kim is selling millions of artillery shells to Putin worth billions of dollars. That is bad news for Ukraine, but good news for South Korea, since it gives Kim a lifeline to avoid conflict. If Kim were genuinely intent on going to war, the last thing he would do is sell ammunition lest he risk running short of arms during wartime. Of course, Kim could still completely go off script and disprove conventional wisdom. It happened in Ukraine, Israel, Iran, and it's just the type of conflict that can happen in Korea. The only thing we can say with a level of confidence is that North Korea is ready to fight a war, but it has no intention of starting one. I've been your host Shirvan from Caspian Report. If you approve of what we do, please leave a comment, hit the like button, and mayhaps share the video. In any case, thank you for your time, and Sawal.